Hey guys, in today's video, you might remember 5 years or so ago I did a review of one of these GM MDI scan tool knockoffs, and I wanted to update that for the more recent one. So what we're going to do in today's video is take a look at the high quality, allegedly one-to-one clones that claim they're MDI2s. So if you're interested in that kind of unboxing and review and analysis, stay tuned. All right guys, when you get the box for this, what you'll get is a USB cable, and you'll get a cable that's going to hook up to the diagnostic link connector, all very similar to the MDI copies. And then you'll get some stickers, very similar to what the MDI copies had, that claim that it's an MDI2. And of course you'll get the unit that looks like an MDI2, but I'm here to tell you it's not. So what this is actually one of these put in a package that looks like an MDI2. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's this one I have here, and I've been using for many years. I actually have two, and they work great in the shop. They're one-to-one. They're identical knockoffs of the MDI. And I will tell you this MDI2 is just as good as that. However, it's not an MDI2. So let's go over how you can tell the differences, right? So right off the bat, when you get the packaging, if you had a real MDI2, it would have a couple of obvious differences. So one, here's just the package, what you get with the real MDI2. You would have gotten the two cables I showed, plus an Ethernet cable, plus a couple of USB Wi-Fi adapters. These are peer-to-peer adapters between the J2534 compatible MDI2 unit and the laptop running Windows. So that's one obvious difference right there. The other is an obvious difference is these GM logos are stickers, so they don't get stuck in customs importing something that's counterfeit or a knockoff, whereas the real one, of course, the GM logo would be silk screened into the plastic just like the rest of this writing. So that's one very obvious way to spot the difference, but there's more. When you take a look at the unit and you see on the end here, it tells you that it's got a USB-B connector here, and it does. It tells you it's got an Ethernet here, and it does. And it tells you there's Wi-Fi under here. But if we peel this rubber cover off, and it does come off, but it's like a really tight fit, the ones on the MDI are a lot easier to wedge off of here. I might have to get a little prizing tool to coax this guy off. All right, guys, let's just take a plastic trim tool and see if we can help get this little rubber guy off. There he goes. The good news is he's on pretty tight. All right, so if we take a look at this, here's the connector for the other end of our USB cable to the laptop, right? And here's our Ethernet connector, but there's supposed to be a USB connector here for us to plug in that Wi-Fi peer-to-peer adapter, and it's not there. And in fact, another key that this is just an MDI type clone is if we shine a flashlight in here. Hopefully you guys can see if I put this in right there. What you can see inside, you'd have to take it apart, but it's just the same compact flash type Wi-Fi card connector that the MDI uses, not a USB type. So it's going to limit you to 802.11g type connectivity. All right, so if we pan back out, we keep going on the other side. The other side shows two other USB connections, but we have one power connection sitting under what's labeled a USB, and then we have one blank tap. And the power connection does work, and of course this is where you would be able to connect your DLC connector. So we can take a AC adapter that's not included. I'm just going to use this little AC adapter here that does 12 volts, 2 amps. This is what I actually use on a Tech 2 type scan tool. And we can plug that in to this little jack here, and we can show you what the power-up sequence is like on this guy. So it'll start off with a check. It'll go to this little car, which is running the power-on self-test for the portion of the board. There's two boards in here. One of them covers testing interface to the vehicle. It's now jumped over to this one. This is testing interface to a laptop. It's a beep, and then this light lights up. Then there's a chirp, rather, this light lights up, and then there's the beep that you heard, right? So we can turn that off, and it has a sound effect. Turn it back on, and it'll go through the same power on self-test. This time, I won't say anything, and you can hear that kind of successful chirp and then beep. So we're over here, and then we're going to come over here. There's the chirp, and there's the beep. If there had been a failure during the power on self-test, this red LED would light up underneath this exclamation point type of icon to let you know that something had failed. So that's a quick and easy first pass check to know that it's basically working. Like I said, it's just an MDI. What's the difference between an MDI and an MDI2? Well, the key difference between the two and why it matters that it's just an MDI is that the next generation vehicle platforms from GM, and they talk about this starting with the 2020 Corvette and also the Cadillac CT4. So nothing before 2020 is a concern. Vehicles starting in 2020 and during the pandemic started to require the MDI2. And like we were reading here, the difference is that those vehicles that require the MDI2 require support for CAN FD, which is the Computer Area Network Flexible Data, and DoIP, or Diagnostics over Internet Protocol. Only the MDI2 can support the new CAN FD protocol and the DoIP protocol for programming and diagnostics. And MDI can't do that, and neither can this clone. So now that's a thing if you have one of those vehicles, but if you don't have one of those vehicles, this is a great economical alternative to an MDI. I certainly wouldn't have any qualms about using either the original clone of the MDI or this MDI2 kind of knockoff, just understanding it cannot do anything more than the unit on my left. It cannot do what an MDI2 can do. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the online information and some other differences. All right, guys, let's take a look at some of the other resources that are available similar to when I talked about the original MDI. You can search on Google for Bosch MDI Manager, and you can find the software from Bosch, who's the designer of the hardware that GM uses for both the MDI and the MDI2. And when we come into this is typically where we could find firmware updates. And so you can see over here there's 3 downloads. For this exercise, I've downloaded all 3 of these. Run the install for the MDI setup first, then run the setup for MDI2, and then run the setup for the launcher last. The launcher picks between MDI and MDI2 and launches the appropriate manager software. And the reason we're doing this is to show you another level of incompatibility with the genuine MDI2 and the fact that this clone is really an MDI clone, not an MDI2 clone. So we're powering on the unit here in the background, and we're going to kick off the launcher here in the foreground. And the launcher will come up and it'll say, do you have an MDI2 or an MDI? Well, we think we have an MDI2. So we're going to make that selection and we're going to launch it. Our MDI clone is up and running. It says no MDIs connected. I'm going to plug in the USB cable. You hear the beep. No MDIs detected. So this is not recognized as an MDI2 by the Bosch software for GM. If I close this and I run it again, it's actually going to auto-detect that it's an MDI, and it's going to connect just fine. So again, it's an MDI. It's not an MDI2. It hooks up just fine. We could check and see if we had an update. We don't. We could put the device into recovery mode and reinstall the firmware if we wanted. We could come over here and set up the wireless if we had one of those compact flash cards to put in there. You'd have to, of course, on this model, disassemble it. But we don't have that. But this is where you would come in and do that configuration. Similarly, for wired Ethernet, you'd come over here. You'd enable this. I'm going to go ahead and enable that, applying an IP address automatically, and it'll do its thing. All right, let's look at something else now. Let's take a look at ACDelco TDS, Technical Delivery System. So this is ACDelcoTDS.com. This is where you would pick up your subscriptions for Techline Connect, and that you would use a tool like this. You would either use it on a one vehicle VIN subscription for a year, or I think it's for a year or 2 years. I'm sorry, 2 years for $45 per VIN. Or you could use GDS2 for the diagnostics. You can get a 3-day weekend on this for $64. You can use the Tech to Win emulator on a 3-day weekend for $62. And there's combinations and different things like that. And then, of course, there's the service information that doesn't require any kind of tool to use. Now, this is the legit stuff. I'm not a believer in using any of this virus-laden, hacked-up hard drives that you can pick up from sellers in China. I don't mind charging my customers the cost of this. If I do something for somebody, I need this for doing it, I'm going to charge them the $64. That's just how it works. If I go into resources, I can find user guides. And if I launch the MDI2 user guide, I got it already loaded up here, I can find some more information that ties into what I was showing you. So remember, we were looking at these 2 USB covers here, and then we were looking at the ones here and here. So on the clone, this one's covered up, and this one's actually a power adapter for a wall unit, just like the original MDI. You can see here on the real MDI, 3 and 5 are just standard Type A USB ports. They're not power connectors. And then 6 is the same, like the port B for the connection here, and then 8 is Ethernet, just like we saw, but 7 is actually supposed to be where that USB wireless adapter plugs in. So that's just some additional ways you can tell the difference between the real MDI2 and these knockoffs that are actually just an MDI clone with the circuit board redesigned to fit into a case that looks like an MDI2. They're great one-to-one knockoffs of the MDI. They're just not knockoffs of the MDI2. All right, guys, the last thing I'm going to show you on this MDI2 is we've got it hooked up to the vehicle, just showing you a quick test with Techline Connect. You can see that while it's communicating, this light above the little icon for a personal computer will flash. That shows you that it's got connectivity through USB to whatever laptop or computer you're using. And then the light for the car connection will be solid, which means it's established a connection to the car's onboard system and is able to communicate with the car area network. So here we're just running in Techline Connect version 1.21.10. So this is the latest as of the date of the video. Up here in the top left, you can see that. And we're just looking at a list of modules here, but I'm just showing you that this reads in with Techline Connect just fine. So what's the bottom line recommendation? So my bottom line recommendation is it's a fine MDI. It is a fine MDI, and it is recognized as an MDI by Techline Connect. It is not recognized as an MDI2. So if you're looking for an MDI, this is great. Don't just disregard that it says MDI2 on it. It's an MDI1. And if you're looking for an MDI, it's a great one-to-one high-quality knockoff of an MDI. If you need an MDI2, these clones aren't it. They can't do CAN FD, and they can't do DoIP protocol. So vehicles from 2019 back, it's great. Everything in 2020, but the 2 I mentioned earlier, it's great. But as the years have marched on, it's getting to be where you have to have a real MDI2 to do some of those new vehicles. Anyway, I hope this video helps you out, helps you make a decision. I'll put links in the description where you can find these. They're great if you just want to do an MDI. If you got comments or questions, leave them below. I'll try to help. If you found this interesting or it helped you make a decision, pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.